You are listening to The Only Constant, a podcast where we go beyond the usual discussions in technology and business and aim to explore more than explain. Join me for engaging discussions with a diverse range of global thought leaders as we seek to uncover new perspectives and insights in a free-flowing conversation. My guest today is Dr. Lorien Pratt, and I am your host, Lasse Rindom. Hi, Dr. Lorien Pratt, and thank you so much for joining me today for this episode of The Only Constant. I'm really, really happy to have you on the show and finally got to make this episode with you.
Well, thank you, Lasse. Delighted to be here.
So, Lorien, you're a decision intelligent professional. You actually invented the term, as far as I understand, together with some others, right? And you also have some very strong opinions on why this is important. We'll get to that. But first of all, I'd like to ask you, what is actually wrong with the hippo, the highest paid person's opinion? Because these people are, after all, often also the most experienced.
Absolutely. And, just to put this in context, we're talking about executives in the commercial world as well as in government and in the nonprofit sector as well. And, the highest paid person does have the most experience, and often their intuition is very good. So, one of the key things about decision intelligence is we're not trying to take their intuition out of the room. Instead, we're trying to do what we call augmented intelligence. It's not fully automated like we would do, decide which ad to show you on Google or which content to show you on Facebook. And it's not fully manual, like you look at a report and you decide what to do, but something in the middle where the computer is using data and real-time information that might be too voluminous and too comprehensive for that hippo, that highest paid person, to keep in their head all at the same time. And I think there's a number of dimensions as to why more and more organizations are seeking to make these high-level decisions and mid-level and as well as low-level decisions with more data and evidence. But they all fall under the umbrellas. It allows companies to be more effective in the commercial world, to be more competitive. And as we move forward in the political and nonprofit sectors, to serve their constituents more effectively. I think most everybody knows we couldn't do advertising without data, right? I mean, we wouldn't dare to
Mm-hmm.
think about figuring out the right ad or the right audience to target without data. And that same idea, with massive modifications, let's be clear, we can't just do, Google automated AI or automated machine learning and then apply it to this augmented intelligence world. So we have to change it. But that highest paid person, he's going to be the most, and it's often a he, although let's say he or she will be the most effective if they have a combination of their best intuition based on their experience, plus the experience of all kinds of other people they know, right? So it shouldn't be just the one person, plus real time data and information that would be impossible for them to keep in their heads by themselves.
So I actually like the way you're coining it here because I'd like to find a way where I can maybe attack you a little bit here or find some but you're
Oh,
always
yes,
saying that
please.
but they are important, you're saying all the time, right? Because I always think the context that they're bringing, the word hippo has a totally negative connotation to it, right? Obviously it sounds like just this big animal just sitting there being immovable, right? And I agree with you. You need to have data and informed decisions, but the contextual issue that's in an AI world today, that is what people are struggling with, getting the right context to these Gen AI models, the LLMs, for instance, right? And these people, the hippos, they have that. That's what they do, right? They have the contextual understanding all the time of what's going on, or to some extent. That's at least why they're there, right? That they can see a bigger picture or some risks associated with it, and in the end, they're the one taking the decisions as well. So, so it's just it's not supposed to be against their decision making, right, and their final say, because you will always end up having that. I have friends, who's come up with the right setups for things, right analysis for things, but then end up, only having 90% of their proposal accepted by C levels. But that might also be okay, right? Because the C level might have a reflected opinion. Or what do you think?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think what you're referring to is the fact that the best decisions come based on input from a diversity of perspectives.
Mm,
So it is a mistake to just use the intuition of the C level because she or she will be somewhat disconnected from the day-to-day operations. It's also a mistake to make a decision just based on your customers or just based on your partners or just based on your line workers. The best decisions actually come from incorporating a diversity of perspectives and then also, various kinds of demographic diversity, young people, old people, folks of different races, etc. That really, and there is good research showing that we tend to get some tunnel vision when we sit within our own perspective. And so taking, your friends who are submitting those proposals and having their perspective married together with the experience and intuition of someone who's been around the block a few times, is really, generally speaking, all other things being equal, what's the most effective. I do want to speak though. Sometimes that hippo, he's making decisions because he's always done things that way. So, we have a grant from the
mm.
U.S. Department of Agriculture right now, and something we've learned is that growers, agricultural growers, do things not through some rationale, but because this is how we've always done things.
Yeah,
And
power of habits, right?
yeah, and in a volatile world, that's, in many situations not working anymore. Yeah, just doing things because we always have, and I think the pandemic is one really good, example. Our farmers are facing, different soil conditions because the climate is changing. They're facing different worker conditions because the availability of labor has been shifting, and during the pandemic, we had and continue to have a lot of supply chain problems. And so if you just keep doing the same thing you've always done, but yet the environment is changing, what we talk about in decision intelligence is how your actions combine together with your environment to lead to your outcomes. And if you keep
Mm.
taking the same actions in a changed environment, you're not necessarily going to achieve the best outcomes. So that is the other thing that we try to sort of break with that hippo is that tendency to just always do things because we've always done them this way.
But don't you also think that people do these habits because they're guardrail against some kind of flux, right? So if you always adapt to new things all the time, you will be in this state of not being anything, right? And a state of also some weird anxiety state as well, right? Because in psychology, you always assume who the other person is, right? You assume who they are, and you say that's okay. But if you always had to, Jacques Lacan, the psychoanalysis, said that true love is constant fear, right? Because you will always be aware that the other one is a complete stranger to you all the time, and you will always be fearful for that reason. So there's this thing that we sort of make a habit about things all the time
Well,
to
I think
avoid
I
this
think you
fear.
raise I think you raise a really important point, which is that taking risk into account is definitely part of decision making, whether you're a hippo or someone else. And often when we deliver decision intelligence solutions, this question of can I take an action that not only I think is going to lead to the best outcome, but also it's an uncertain world. Can I also
Yeah.
have an action that minimizes the chances that if something goes wrong, that will have a bad outcome. And so you raise a really important point, and I think it actually sort of supports what we were saying before. Now I'm not just thinking about how a changing external world affects my actions. Now it's a changing, uncertain external world.
Yeah.
So what do we say? VUCA: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, right? So I
That's
that's an
nice.
old phrase.
I haven't heard that one before. It's a good
It's
one.
a good one. It's been around about 10 years and it's a little bit overused, but lately I've been saying VUCA a lot: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. And I think those are characteristic of a world in which actions we take have global impacts. And so our context isn't just local, right? It's not just us and our local community when we make business decisions. You're sourcing globally and you're also selling globally. And that's just the
Mm.
commercial side of the story. So, that creates a level of complexity that never existed 50 years ago.
But that was also part of the thing that most people, experienced during, for instance, COVID, was this experience of everything suddenly being everything, all the habits, all the everything was in a flux all of a sudden, the uncertainty. And could we have predicted this? Some could maybe, right? But but most ordinary people like me and a layperson would not be able to predict that this would happen this way it did, right? But do you think
Yeah,
someone
and
should have predicted that?
I think yes, and I think we did predict COVID. The challenge was not our lack of prediction; it was our lack of knowing what to do. And this again, this is what we're about to talk about specifically what decision intelligence is. But that's actually a really good example of a lead-in. There is a difference between prediction and deciding what actions to take.
Mm,
And I know my mom in the middle of COVID, she's 87 now, and she's trying to decide whether to go to the grocery store or not. And if she does, whether she should wear a mask or not. I remember I went to the doctor at the very beginning of COVID when people were saying don't wear masks. Um, and what we don't have is advice as to what to do. So there's a difference. And I think my favorite example is like the GPS on your car, the navigating system, right? What if it only showed you maps and it didn't say
mm,
like turn left? And then okay, what if it only predicted traffic jams? Okay, great. There's a traffic jam in town. What I really need to know is turn left at the next intersection. I don't need data. Well, it's great. Start with, I need the data to start with. I need the prediction. That's great. But
mm,
those are necessary, but not sufficient. I also need to be told what to do. My mom needed something to tell her that this, for her age and who she was, she should not have gone to the grocery store, or maybe she could go to the grocery store safely and wear a mask. And there was nothing that told her that. We only had the data and the prediction. We didn't then assemble that data and prediction into what should I do? And
the
that's really what
context.
decision intelligence is all about. Is it's giving you recommendations. It's letting the computer help you with that combination process.
Cool. So that's actually one of the things I wanted to ask you, right? You've coined and defined this as decision intelligence, but what is it really?
It's two things. It is a system for starting with a person who needs to make a decision and asking them a set of questions in a systematic way about, like, what are the outcomes you're trying to achieve with your decision? What choices are you trying to make as to what to do in order to achieve those outcomes? It's a systematic way of asking those questions, and then we draw something called a causal decision diagram, which it's really similar. Like, there was a time before Gantt charts, before we drew pictures of tasks and dependencies, and then somebody said, "Oh, if we draw a map of this, if we draw a picture of this, it helps everybody get on the same page." There was a time before blueprints, right? A time before we drew blueprints of buildings,
Mm,
and there's only so complex a building you can build if you don't have a blueprint in advance to get the electricians
mm,
and the plumbers all on the same page. Well, a decision model or a causal decision diagram is the same thing. So DI is about working with diverse stakeholders to create that diagram. And then it's about taking that diagram and using it as a specification for a simulation so that now we can simulate COVID decisions and kill people in the simulation to make it less likely to kill them in reality. And then to optimize to say, okay, given everything we know that's here and all the data that we have, what are the best actions we should take that are most likely to achieve our goals with the least risk of something going wrong?
but this is
So
also
it's those
something
two
I wanted to
parts.
ask you. Is this really technology or a mindset or an approach to? Is it more analysis about what leads to a decision, or is it really tech, right? Because you have a machine learning background. You invented machine learning transfer, right? So
Yeah.
you're quite a legend in that field as well. But is this really technology, or is this more about mapping out what goes into a decision, understanding the complexities of the world?
It started out as a technology play, because I was a market analyst for about 10 years. I interviewed a bunch of decision makers and executives and managers, and I was just shocked. I had these 3 computer science degrees, and I'd published papers, and I was pr I'd done all the things as an academic, and I was shocked that these people couldn't even spell AI, and technology wasn't getting used. And so I spent a year seeking to fill that gap to say, why is it that we published all these great things, we had all these grants and millions of dollars from the federal government, and yet the people I'm talking to aren't using it. And so it was originally a technology play purely to try to fill that gap between what we
Mhm.
were building in machine learning and the fact that it wasn't getting used in any systematic way outside of advertising, right? Let's be clear, Google and Amazon. But it turns out they're outliers, right? That's a very specific use case. Um, but then as we got into it, we realized that in order to get the technology working, we actually need a new mindset and we need a new methodology. So these days, and then what happened? This is weird. In the last couple of years, people have now used this word decision intelligence to mean like all of analytics.
Mm.
Gartner said 15% of their data and analytics vendors that they talk to call their thing decision intelligence. So now it's got this third identity as this umbrella for all of data and analytics for people who are trying to do a brand refresh. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's also why, you got hyped suddenly. I also realized it on Gartner and everything. You got hyped by that, by them doing that, right? Everyone adopting this word, right? And but
Yeah.
why? But that's also one of my questions. Why isn't this just AI or BI, right? To some extent, it sounds like the same from the way people are terming it. But I also see it as something where maybe some people say, okay, we can do this, the technology stuff, just like just you came from yourself in the beginning. You came from the technology setting, and then said, how can we translate this into business problems? And that was by starting talking mapping problems and real world scenarios, and then adding the technology to it afterwards. So this is actually maybe a more than a justification for technology now, a justification for doing some some deep enterprise architecture, business architecture modeling instead, isn't it?
Yeah, and you know what I would do is I would call it decision architecture. I would
Of course you
Harvard
would.
Business, yeah, right. Harvard Business Review says that the modern organization is a decision factory; that it's not producing widgets or objects, but by and large, if we kind of ethnographically study what's getting produced every day, it is decisions. And yet we have not taken that seriously. We haven't said, how do the decisions at the executive level impact decisions at middle management, impact the organization as a whole. And by taking it seriously, what I mean is, we haven't really formalized that in such a way that we can then say, okay, how can AI be our partner in that? How can
Mhm.
data be our partner in that? Instead, we've got this great cultural separation right now where the data scientists are not traditionally taught how to think about the business problems that they're solving. Instead, the data scientists are taught how to wrangle data, and then they talk about we're gonna deliver insights. And insights are great, but insights also the word that people use when they don't know the decision maker that they're trying to support, nor do they know
Yeah.
the role that they're trying to support, nor the business outcomes that their data is supposed to support. So we have this weird situation right now where the people that need to use data and analytics are quite separate than the people who deliver the data and analytics. And so we do need to take more seriously this question of a decision architecture. Um, and
Yeah,
yeah,
but also I love
that's where
that.
we're
I
going.
there's so many things I thought about when you said that, because I always said, instead of talking enterprise architecture, we need to talk cross company architecture, because enterprise architecture sort of alludes to a company existing in its own right, in its own little vacuum, and I hate that. But decision architecture is actually much better, because it looks more about what are we actually trying to do, makes an enterprise more a sum of actions than an actual entity, right? And takes the social construct seriously to some extent that way, right? We're always
Yeah,
manifesting the enterprise when we're doing
I think
things,
in
right?
in particular, when we talk about enterprise architecture, we're often talking about software that we're going to deliver. And,
Yeah, but that's
of
not my point.
course,
that was why I said
oh,
business architecture as well. I
oh,
did the
I
other
get it.
thing, business model
You're right.
canvas stuff and all that, right? Strategic architecture that way, but also
Yeah.
just saying that because I have I have a humanistic background, so actually I'm a historian by education, which is weird to work in tech with that background, but I do that. And I always say that the social construct idea, that we create things all the time. When we talk about the companies we work for, we create the companies, we manifest them through our words. So doing this, the action thing, focusing on the decisions, I like that, because that's where you're manifesting the company as well, by focusing on that. I love that. uh, um, but I think that the gap between technology and strategy and business, or what you call it, is growing. I think that's been brilliantly also exemplified in the last couple of years, where we had Gen AI come out and people being like, what should we use it for? And then a lot of companies saying, oh, we don't know either, but here's a fine-tuned model, or here's something, a switchboard or something, an orchestrator, but no one really knows what it's going to be like because this is a novel technology. So this mismatch has been really, really big, became really big suddenly, right? Because everyone I talk to wants to know what are the best use case everyone's using it for, but I can't tell them that because there's no one to imitate. So there's really a big strategic deficit in the market right now.
Yeah, so I'm hoping, Lessa, that 10 years from now, we won't have to laugh and think how unusual it is that a historian is talking tech, because as tech and analytics and data and machine learning in particular mature, we are increasingly realizing that the human element is absolutely key, and
Mm,
that if we have been systematically ignoring it, and so we're delivering data that doesn't get used, and we're not delivering the data that does need to be used, because it's people, process, and technology. And if we don't get the three legs of the stool in balance, the stool falls over. And so this is the reason we see a lot of AI projects that are failing right now, a lot of data projects that are failing, is they're systematically ignoring, and it's not just human psychology, it also is history. I mean, what is the point of history if not to learn lessons that we can use to make decisions today? And so,
mm,
a big part of decision intelligence is to try to elicit those historical micro components, those lessons. If you do this, it'll cause this. In this
mm.
situation, this tends to happen. That's why we study history, I think. It's interesting. But aside from that, the practical side is so that we can get those nuggets of knowledge into our heads such we can be more effective going forward. And DI really embraces that. It says, let's document that in a structured and reusable way. And let's document and save it and integrate it so that the AI and the data can sit side by side with those lessons that we've learned from history. And again, back to the hippo, right? He's got this historical context which
Yeah.
drives his intuition. And we want to honor that and make sure that that stays in the room because it's very valuable.
But I think you're making such nice little, you're gathering things together here. I think that's brilliant. But it also made me think, right? If I look historically at this explosion of AI that we've had the last couple of years, right after ChatGPT, it's been really a massive explosion of investment and attention, and everyone's been using it, and it's generative AI primarily, but people are very focused on this will replace stuff, right? But historically, if you look at whenever we have invented anything new, any new technology, we have only, and a lot of other people have said this also on the podcast, we've only invented more complex solutions we want to do. We only invented more complex problems that we need to solve. So the technology is not adequate to fix all of it anyway, right? To some extent. And that's history. So are we really going to be out of a job, all of us? Is this going to fix everything? Is it going to save the world, Lorien? Are we still just going to invent more complex problems? Do we want
Well,
more?
I think there's a class of problems that we have created, and I put climate, global conflict, poverty, income and wealth inequality. There's a class of problems that remain really fundamentally unsolved. And I
Mm,
believe that the reason these are unsolved is that they cross domains. You can't solve conflict without solving water and food
mm.
and access to resources. You can't solve climate without solving business, without ensuring that the most polluting organizations can stay alive and satisfy the needs of their shareholders. And so I think what we have is these highly interdependent domains that are definitional of a new class of problems that we haven't yet solved. And I
And
think
they're high
it's
complex again. Complexity is increasing there again, right?
They are high complexity, they're also exponential, and human brains are
Mm,
just not very good at the slow burn, the thing that's growing and growing and growing, and then suddenly it J curves and it takes off and causes problems. And so to expand our cognition so that we can think better in space, but also in time, so that we can visualize the impacts of our actions 2, 5, 10 years from now, we need to invite technology to the room because our cognitive capacity is just plain limited. And so I think there will be a new class of problems. Will AI save the world? Absolutely not, because we need humans in the loop.
mm.
And AI alone won't save the world, because if you look at AI, it's primarily about, well, historical AI. Let's leave Gen AI out of the picture for just a quick moment. Historical AI, and it's your listeners might not realize AI has been around for 50 years. They might think it was invented, 5 minutes ago.
It was
But
given to Moses on Mount Sinai.
yeah,
Just tell
that's right. um,
November 22.
exactly right. No, that was the date. It was that year.
Yeah.
Um, what you might not realize is historical AI is good at that prediction problem. And so if we get back to the GPS, right? We have the map. That's great. We have the data that comes in. Now we can make a prediction as to where the traffic jam is going to be. But AI alone does not go far enough to help us decide or recommend what to do. And so it will be a combination of our ability to expand the human brain, which, is something we've always done, is expanded the human brain and body over the years through
Mm,
levers and metallurgy and, whatever you know your anthropological history better than I do, right? It's what we do is we expand
mm,
our capabilities through technology. And the next big wave of how we will expand things is an understanding of these very complex, gnarly problems that cross domains. And your listeners might be thinking, "Oh my gosh, that's so hard, right? How can we
yeah.
possibly do that?" Well, decision intelligence says there's a one bite at a time approach to it, and
The same as
you can
like if you ask someone, 200 years ago that you should learn how to drive a car 100 miles an hour, right? They would, that's maybe fast, but they would be like, whoa, 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 never
not for
happen.
Max
But now you,
Verstappen.
no, no, no. But now you can just, yeah, not for max, but it's like 60 miles an hour. This problem is I'm European, so I don't really know how fast 60 miles an hour is. I'm a kilometer guy, right? So 100 kilometers an hour, it would be fast for someone 200 years ago on a horse, and they would be frightened of it, right? The first people in a car were frightened of just going, 10 kilometers an hour. But suddenly we grow into it and we start learning to work with that speed, and it's something that goes incremental. So that might also be some of the fears that is in the world right now. People are afraid that this is happening overnight, and it brings me back to habit. There's a habit thing as well, that slows thing down, adoption down a little bit. Um, what am I trying to get at here?
Well, there's no question that AI and tech is going to displace some jobs.
Mm,
There is no question that every technology both displaces jobs as well as creates
yeah,
opportunities.
exactly.
And so the question for your listeners is, how do you surf that and how do you stay ahead of the wave?
Yeah, that's a good question. But it takes me to some of the things I've always thought about is that to some extent there's a focus you talk about developers being replaced by generative AI right now, right? For instance, there's a lot of talk about that, but I think that's looking very isolated on task level developing. But the whole when you're developer, you also have this whole the orchestration of code and the reason for it. And my point is, you might get more productive, Lorien, right, by using AI, but I might not agree with you. So the alignment between us and demand discussion is still something we need to have outside of it. And AI will never fix that. And we won't get more productive if I don't agree with you. And do you get where I'm going here?
Well,
It's very
just a
isolated.
side
There's a
point.
tendency to look at isolated elements. This code
Yeah.
would be optimized by AI, no coders anymore. And this, but the whole orchestration of it, that's a human thing.
Yeah, and it's nothing we haven't done before. I mean, we got 10 times more effective when we went from assembler language to compiled languages,
Mm,
right? And we got 10 more times more effective when we went from machine code to assembler. I mean, this is the natural progression of what we do in computer science is and I've been coding the last couple weeks. I had vacation last week, so I got to code. Um,
nice.
and it's 10x. I mean,
You
I
had
gotta
vacation.
that's me. I got, I open up my 2 monitors. I've got ChatGPT in one window. I'm using 4.0, and I'm saying, "Please help me write this piece of code." And it's writing it. Is it getting it correct? No. Is it has
Nice.
some systematic problems? Yes. But am I coding 10 times faster than I was before? Absolutely. I would be insane
Mm,
as a coder not to use it. And I even ask it to help me code things that I know how to do. But I don't wanna take the 10 minutes when it can do it in half a minute. Why not?
no,
Right?
no, that's right.
So it's there's danger to that. There's the automatic pilot problem with that, but, it never gets it completely right. And so I think that pattern crosses across tech is, absolutely Gen AI is like a thermonuclear bomb in the middle of tech. It's changing the
Mm.
dynamics no less than the original internet, because it is a new user interface that allows us to access AI and data and analytics in a much easier way. Just like the browser, just like Netscape. I mean, I was doing chat rooms, 15 years before Netscape. I've got
Mm.
email, but nobody heard of it. I was a nerdy computer scientist and nobody knew what I was talking about. I go to a cocktail party, I say I sent an email. People don't know what I'm doing. But then we have the browser and the internet, and suddenly with this usability shift, everything is easier. And that's what's going on with Gen AI. Gen AI is a usability layer on top of it's like we've been building the engines of cars, but we never built the drivers, where the driver has a steering
Mm.
wheel, and suddenly now there's steering wheels, and so everybody and his brother can access the power under the hood of that car.
Yeah.
Now I've been building the engine for 40 years, and so it's really exciting to be able to see, small businesses that I work with, as well as the large enterprises, be able to access that power in a way that they never could before. It's exciting time to be a computer scientist, I have to say.
Definitely, but I also think there's something, they're so chaotic in a way, and they can understand, more unpredictable patterns. They're stochastic, like our minds, and there's something there also, replacing the. Usually, we made humans predictable so we could replace it with technology, but now we've sort of replaced the unpredictability of a human with technology, and that's a completely weird thing. It's not transactional the same way as it used to be, and people are having hard time grasping how what does this mean? I'm used to a system being like this, and suddenly it's this, which is what?
You're absolutely right. I mean, you make a really good point. When we went from machine language to assembler to compilers, we
Mm.
didn't like have to add some uncertainty, unpredictability into the picture. And you're absolutely right. With this layer, we are adding some uncertainty and unpredictability. But step back from that, that's not new. Machine learning always worked probabilistically. Statistics always worked. I mean, I built a regression model for something.
Yeah,
It's not going to be perfect. And many computer systems have historically contained at their heart a little statistical model. Like when somebody predicts, like, I go to my doctor, I had cancer a few years back. She said, here's the likelihood you're going to survive, right? Well, that wasn't a definite, that was a probabilistic assessment. I'm glad I fell on one side of that hyperplane and not the other.
mm,
But so having uncertain components in our software systems is definitely something that is not brand new. It's just a little bit unusual in this particular context, but we know how to handle that. We have, probabilistic backtesting methods, and we have rubrics that we can apply to these things. We can have one LLM grade the work of another LLM. We can have mechanical Turks,
yeah,
what
that's
Facebook
exactly the
does
thing,
with
right? Yeah,
content
yeah. But
moderation, all of
you
that.
know this, right? Well, I did the same. I thought of it in stochastic. What else do I know about that stochastic? I thought about quantum mechanics, right? And if you have one droplet in a dew and in a fog, it falls completely crazy, randomized. That's something Schrödinger wrote about in What Is Life. But if you have millions of them, the fog will fall regularly. So
Mm.
adding more agents, I'm always saying, you get a more predictable outcome, right? That's just something people need to realize now. I think
Law of large
maybe waiting.
numbers. Yeah.
Yeah, large like not more, just more than one. Just more
Law of
than
more
one.
than one number. That's true.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But there's just there's just this great deal of focus on technology supply right now in this AI market that we're having right now, that we can do this and that, and everyone's always yelling game changer this, game changer that, when something else comes out from I don't know, when Elon Musk says AGI in a year or whatever, right? But are we
He's
forgetting the
wrong.
why to what we do? Are we forgetting the why to what we do, right? And I also thought about what you said before, that the we are getting a complete things. We've dropped this atom bomb, this nuclear bomb. Things are changing so rapidly right now. You said that before, right? But
Yeah.
who would I ask for what this will mean than Lorien Pratt? So
So,
there's
yeah.
two things
So
here. Are we forgetting the why, and what's going to happen with this Gen AI bomb?
So, yes, we are forgetting the why, and to some extent. Whenever tech gets cool, we tend to go into our tech heads, and I call it being a solutionista. You're just focusing on, the data and the training and the tech, And, there was a great article in the New York Times about Sam Altman. I remember about a couple months ago reviewing, what was going on with Gen AI. And it was all on the solution side.
Yeah.
It wasn't, here's the use cases, here's the problems that it could solve. So, trick number one, we talked about staying ahead of the curve for your listeners. Read materials through the lens of, is this talking about a solution to a problem that we haven't well articulated? And if it is, we're being a solutionista and we're making a classic mistake, right? And when we live in the solutionista land, we tend to over-engineer things. We tend to misengineer things. We tend to build things that aren't needed and not build the things that actually are needed. And it's fun,
Yes.
and academics reinforces this because it's really fun to build the tech. But if we are often forgetting the why, and this is natural. I mean, the Wright brothers invented the airplane. They did not invent the airline. Okay. So they didn't have to worry about, why people fly or anything. All they had to worry about was the tech. There's a
Mm.
moment in the evolution of any technology's history where it moves from the under the hood, inside the box, how cool is this, to, okay, who's going to use it? And then we start talking about design thinking. We start talking about user experience. We start talking about use cases. We start to shift our perspective, or at least complement our perspective, from the under the hood to the driver's seat, right?
Mm.
And
Mm.
this is the transition we're going through right now. This is the transition where we're saying, okay, what are the use cases that people can do to use this technology? And what we're discovering is that Gen AI has like 7 categories of use cases. It can help you generate content. It can help you make decisions with decision intelligence. It works hand in hand with
Mm.
DI, and there's 5 other categories. And so, if you want to stay ahead of the curve, start asking the why questions. What use case does this help you to solve within your sphere of influence? But don't go crazy. I've got people in climate who say, oh, we're going to build a digital twin of the planet Earth. No, that takes too long. Okay. Instead, we need to shift to, who's a city manager or a policymaker or somebody in this climate space who needs to make a decision, right? That you don't need to boil the ocean of a whole digital twin to focus on that guy and help him make better decisions by getting him better data, better AI, a recommender system of some sort, and better
Mm.
decision support. So, I think I answered your first question, but not necessarily your second one. That's my comments on the why.
Yeah,
What
but
was the
I think
second one?
yeah, I'll just get to that once because no, I just want to add to that. I always say the hype markets because now this is I lived through the RPA hype market as well, and now this one, that the hype markets always tend to be frictionless. They say things that sound awesome because they don't touch upon anything, and it's very focused, as you say, on tech, very solutionista kind of. But as soon as it starts touching the real world and real use cases,
Yeah,
real business, it slows
yeah.
down. And that's
And
why
let's
it moves
talk.
so fast because it doesn't touch anything, right?
And I really want to jump in and comment on that because, again, if you want your listeners to be smart, they need to listen with the critical lens. And another
Mm.
critical lens, and it directly connects to the hype. The vendors are motivated to tell you that technology is imminent for many reasons, aside from the fact that the technology is actually imminent. Heads of large organizations are answerable to their shareholders, and their shareholders are looking for exponential growth, and their investors are looking for big growth, because
Yes.
that's the vibe, the mythology of tech. And so there's an incentive structure out there for overstatement of the future, and many tech leaders fall into this trap because they have such incredible pressure from their shareholders to pump up the valuation of their organizations, when that may or may not necessarily be true. And so I'm just going to repeat myself. There are many reasons for somebody to tell you that a technology is exciting slash valuable slash imminent slash exponential. Um, Only one of which is that it actually is.
I'm
so,
always saying,
so
I'm always saying,
yeah,
look for things that can be falsified. If you can see it being there right now, work with it. If it's something, you know, they're predicting or saying, don't trust it until you have it in a hype market.
And
That's one of
and
my
and the
points.
problem is the availability, fallacy. You hear it 300 times because, tech giant says a thing, and then especially in AI, oh my gosh, how many new technologies have an entire Hollywood genre associated
Mm,
with them, all right? So
mm.
people, it's just so sexy. It's just so
Yeah,
clickbaity.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
they'll amplify and amplify and amplify.
True.
You'll hear some truth 300 times, and it won't actually be true.
But I saw that, you know, just a couple of weeks ago. You saw the last couple of months, I've seen so many posts about and people talking about, you know, GPT-5. We're gonna have GPT-5, 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 and then 2 weeks ago we got GPT-4. Oh, we got
4.0.
we got the GPT-4 again. I was like, so is anyone gonna comment on how underwhelming that is when everyone's been talking GPT, but no one said anything. It was like, whoa, GPT-4 always the best. Oh, we love it. You know, and I just felt so, you know, I might be
Disappointed,
what's
let
this
down.
not disappointed because I didn't expect GPT-5. I actually didn't, but because I say I work with what I have, and until I see it, I don't trust it right now, just for the time
Right.
being, because there's a lot of promises. You know, the Elon Musk AGI, right? But it's also this, you know, there's people saying you need to fear it, but that's also marketing, right? Because if it's, oh, fire, don't play with fire, then you play with fire, right? And there's this whole thing with, you know, the biggest cloud providers want to use AI as a you know as a reason for push people into cloud instead of being on prem. So there's
Oh boy.
the whole big tech wants to get
Yeah.
AI to be
Because
everything
the
we talk
more
about
AI
already.
we
Yeah.
have, the more data we need, and the more data we need, the more cloud we need, and the more cloud we need, the more data storage and
Hmm.
databases we need.
And the
So
more
there's
big
an
tech will win
entire
everything.
and there's just this huge pre-existing and good on them. I mean, that's okay. That's their business. There's a pre-existing incentive structure to try to say we need giant data,
Mm,
giant AI, et cetera. And what's confusing about this is there is a grain of truth to that, but there's
mm,
also a grain of falsity to it.
mm.
And so don't believe everything you hear and think for yourself, I think would be the bottom line lesson to that.
I think I always use this when I do presentations. So Richard Rummelt, in his Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, he said that when things are uncertain and dynamic, you shouldn't look far ahead in your objective. You shouldn't look strategic. Shouldn't be 5 years ahead. It should be
Mm.
closer to home. You should have, you know, approximate objectives when you have an unclear future, because you have to take the next step based on where you are right now in order not to fall off the cliff. And that's the recommendation I give everyone right now, saying don't believe that, don't prepare yourself for AGI, but prepare yourself for where are you now, how can you adopt what you can see and feel right now, and see how you can take some baby steps there so you don't fall off the cliff. Because if you just run for something, you don't know if it's going to be there. You know, you don't know what's going to hit you. You can't make an AI strategy for an AI that's not here yet.
I haven't heard that before, but I think I will say that on my next podcast and pretend that's my idea. That's brilliant. um,
It's actually just a very short chapter in his Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. Then he has this one. Yeah, anyway, but so but okay. So I also needed to ask you, right? What is actually the opposite of this decision intelligence? What I asked you was, uh, if things are unclear right now with what generative AI gonna mean, right? Then I would ask someone like you, Lorien, about what's the future going to be, because you can help me make the right decisions, right? You do decision intelligence. So is the current AI market the opposite or the problematic? How would someone like you approach the Gen AI nuclear bomb?
wow, there's like 3 questions in there, so let me do them one at a time.
I
What's the
forget the one I asked you about the opposite of decision intelligence. That's
so
a fun one,
don't do
but
the opposite thing,
no,
okay,
no.
and then
Do the nuclear
which
bomb. How would you approach that question?
I would first study what happened around 1990, 1991 with the internet as a whole. And
Mm,
I would look at what was around before then in terms of user interfaces, and then how, suddenly we had the information superhighway and the World Wide Web, and that was created not by new underlying technology, but by a new user interface, the browser. And I would study that. There's a book called The New Thing. There's a number of great histories. Again, we're going back to history, Lessa. Um,
mm,
that time in history when a user interface changed everything. And then step two, I would say, okay, what's been going on in analytics, in data, in AI of the past 50 years, like machine learning and
Mm.
reinforcement learning and those other things, and ask, how does this new user interface, which takes those previously locked up technologies, those are really only available to nerds like me. You got to do your machine learning. And I've been doing this for 40 years. You got to hire Lorien Pratt, right? And she builds your machine learning thing. And you still do kind of, but that is unlocking, that softening. Ask yourself, what happens when we put that driver's seat on top of that Formula One engine? Right? What's going to change when everybody in the world now has access to this incredibly exciting, powerful technology? And then figure out where whether you're a student or a technologist or a director of analytics, where do you fit within that picture? You ignore this at your peril because it's huge, but you take everybody at their word and believe everything you read also at your peril because it's full of hype. It is massively bizarre. Right?
Mm.
And so you can't just ignore it, but you also can't just believe it. So you've really got to take the time to learn it. And what's hard about learning it is there's so much disinformation out there because there's all the
Yeah.
clickbait. And that's what's really hard. So find somebody who's been around a little while, who, like you, Lissa. I mean, there's a kind of person that I meet with, and you're one of them, who's had enough conversations and has worked long enough that they start to have an eye for the bullshit, and they
Mm.
start to have a sense of what's real and not real. And I think without someone who's sort of immersed their heads in that information stream for a while, your chances of being led astray are huge. I mean, I've got a customer right now that spent millions of dollars on some machine learning work that is going to end up being completely wasted because they
Mm.
kind of took the word of the, oh, and the other thing, sorry, I'm going on a little bit, but this is so important.
Cool.
Um, don't let the tech nerdy people just talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and say, okay, I will never understand what they're talking about, but they must be smart. I'm just going to let them do their thing. That's a
Mm.
pattern I see happen systematically where non-technical people sort of check out, and they say, well, if we're going to do machine learning or AI, well, let's hire all the PhDs and we'll just trust them because there's no way I'll ever understand what the PhDs are talking about. Just makes no
Yeah.
sense. That is a recipe for disaster that I have seen play out dozens of times over the years. You must have someone whose job it is to translate what the PhDs are doing into business value. And if you're not talking business value every time you're building something, then your PhDs are falling into the solutionista trap.
Yeah, but I have this. I have a trap of not necessarily being a tech solutionista, but I fall into this. I want to philosophize all the time. So when I do presentations, I often end up being, the big thoughts and the curious, I don't know, sprinkles of something. I want to find where I can be a, genius, right? But then my boss, he always tries to say, how can you make this, change this into something that will actually translate into a CEO level presentation instead? So we go through rounds and we
Oh,
bash at
you
each
got to learn
other.
decision intelligence, Lessa.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
need
yeah,
to
yeah,
to
yeah,
read
yeah,
my
yeah.
book, and
I do,
because
I
that's a
do.
perfect fit, because it's the
I have it
unification of,
here. I
there it
have
is.
it
I see
here.
it. Seriously, I'm speaking with full seriousness. We have been living in these little bastions, these little silos that are separated, where the philosopher, guy who's sort of stepping back and taking the more abstract perspective on things, is completely separated from the data scientist, who's separated from the business guy.
Mm.
It is time, after 2,000 years of over specialization, to reintegrate these
Oh, but I don't think I'm
pictures
doing that.
together.
I'm not saying I'm just over specialized, but when I would do a presentation, I like to be smart, right? And I like to be really smart. So someone's saying like, oh, you are already smart enough, but please translate it into this frame. Okay, cool. Because I can do that. I do solutioning all the time and I'm very concrete. I understand the
Exactly.
context, right? But
You're
sometimes
one
you
of
just
those
want to, when you
rare
go on
we're rare
stage, you just,
people. Yeah,
no.
we call them hyper generalizers or super generalizers, where they understand all the pieces of the car and they see how the cars fit together, as opposed to getting lost within the details of the carburetor chemistry, right? Which
You
is
know
what the
what?
data scientists do.
I'm gonna print this quote and put it on a T-shirt. Lorien Pratt said, "I'm one of those rare
Lordy
people."
Press.
so,
You are. I
but
mean
then,
it. I mean it. I do.
but I think that's it's just, the anxiety of going against the bullshit in the market is also, there's an anxiety to that as well, because everyone's saying things, right, and am I wrong? So I always have to spend time figuring out, am I actually wrong, or am I on the right side of, and you're never on the right side of history, right? I won't never claim to ever be that, but but you try to be on the right side all the time, right?
Well, you can be
You do too,
less
right?
wrong. You can be less wrong. And
That's a good
anybody
answer.
who spends all their time in only the data and doesn't step back and say, what is the effect of this technology on the world? Who will be the user of this? How will this get, whatever benefits, make more people happy or have the social benefit or the environmental benefit? Anybody who loses themselves down in the tech will be more wrong than you, I promise. And we are lacking in people who are willing to step back, um, as you say, because they often lose their credibility. You got to have your, you got to
Mm,
speak with your big syllable words and your data words in many social contexts in order to get cred. It's part of the reason I got a PhD is so people would take me seriously, right? I mean,
yeah.
this is a social space where you need that reputational score, and it's still the truth that you got to be the nerd to get the full reputational points. And DI is trying to change that. DI is trying to change. You can be a car driver without being, the engineer who builds the engine, and you can have a lot of value.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yes, really. So Lorien, just coming back to decision intelligence, I also want to ask you. We have so much data in the world today that we can use to make these better decisions, but there's something that continues to elude our data to decision ability. So the limitations of this approach, that's what I'm looking for. What can we model with the data that we have today, and what would you like to model if you could?
That's a really good question, and I would say it's cause and effect.
Mm,
Um, there's if let's go back to what we're doing with DI. We're trying to start with a business outcome. And then we're trying to say, okay, how could I achieve that business outcome? And if I would encourage your readers as I'm talking the next couple sentences, think of something you want to achieve in your personal life or in your organizational life. What is some outcome? How would you measure it? And then the next question to ask is, what actions, what choices do you have available to you that you're trying to, should I do this? Should I go to college? Should I take this job, et cetera? Should I invest in this market? Should I charge this price? Think of the choices that you have. So now we have like the actions are on the right of a piece of paper and the choices are on the left of a piece of paper. Well, what connects the actions to the outcomes? Well, it's some causal chain in the real world. Like if I apply to Harvard, I might get into Harvard. That will
mm,
get me some reputational points, but it'll also get me some stress and I'll also go into debt. So there's a chain of events that starts with, some human choices and that ends up with some outcome. Many of the links in that chain, there is no data to support. And so the most important thing we need to do, either as individuals or as business leaders, which is to reason about how our choices, business choices, personal choices, lead to outcomes. The most important thing to do, the data is sparse. There's only
mm.
data for some of those links. And the tendency people have is to say, okay, I'm just going to do it between my ears, and I'm not going to use any tech to help me. And it turns out that the tech can still help you, even if there's not any data.
Yeah, but just gets a little bit. You get something that gives you. It's better to get something than have nothing, right? And in
Exactly.
everything when you do statistics or data analytics, there's always a probability score you get out of it. It's probable that this might happen, but you don't really know, right? But you could have mapped out what you said with the big student debt and the stress and everything. You could map that out if you asked the right questions from the beginning. Um,
And what we
it
found is
makes me
even
think. It
just
makes me
drawing the
think so
map.
much about myself, right? Taking chances and sometimes being like, "Oh, you could have foreseen this, Lasse. Why didn't you?"
Like, should you have done the podcast or not? Should you have even invited Dr. Pratt here today? I don't know. What are
I
the
definitely
outcomes of
should.
that, Les?
I definitely
So
should.
that's where the
But
data is missing. And people send it, because we're solutionistas, we're looking for the solution under the data lamppost. We're only trying to solve the problems for which there's lots of data, as
mm,
opposed to the important problems. And then saying, okay, let's start with the problem. The opposite of solutionist is to be problem focused. If we start with the problem, and then we say this, climate change, or should we open a new office in Europe, et cetera. If we start with the problem, then we work back, that'll give us a perspective on where we need to create some data or create some knowledge. And then that allows us to have, a lot more focus than just boiling the ocean and building a big data lake or a data warehouse or something like that.
yeah, but yeah, yes, yes, because that's taking from the data is just saying what can we do with it instead of saying that, like you said, instead of saying what do we want to do with it, right?
Right. It's moving
Mm,
from the Wright brothers to the airline. It is the natural progression of any technology where we move from Oh, we built an airplane. Okay, what can we do with airplanes? Well, we can win World War One and things like that. Just to moving now, let's take the user's perspective. What do humans want to do? What do they desire? Oh, they want to travel from place to place. They want to do it comfortably. Let's
Mm.
look at it from this design thinking, from this human perspective point of view. And it's really turning all. Nothing short of turning all of data science upside down is my mission in life, which is to say, to do data science, you need to start by leaving the data out of the room. Don't let the data in the room if you're going to do a data science project. You start by getting the humans in the room and understanding what problems they're solving. And it's really radical and very iconoclastic. And finally, it's getting taken seriously. But it's taken me 15 years to get taken seriously. And it's kind of
But
been a
that's also
ride.
really that's a really aggressive statement as well, Lorien. And it's also, you with the background you have, and you come and say something like this, right? That's actually quite aggressive. It makes complete sense in the context of our conversation today, but it must be for data scientists who just want to get into the data extremely, you know, again back to the anxious thing, to, I have to say, asking about things, problems they don't understand. That's
So,
out of your
so I
comfort zone,
have the
and
answer.
that's
I
the
have that.
habit of the farmer, right? All those habits and the anxiety, you have
Yeah.
to get out of your habits. That's what you're saying, isn't it? In general,
Okay,
get out of
so
your
so
habits.
sales pitch on. You can't see it if you're on audio, but my most recent book for O'Reilly, the Decision Intelligence Handbook, dihandbook.com, D for decision, I for intelligence, is your answer, data scientist person. It is a structured approach to doing that, so you can
Mm,
get ahead of the curve. And it starts by leaving the data out of the room, but it ends with you combining, digital twins and machine learning and all the data you've ever done, but doing it in
mm.
service of a particular business outcome so that you will be hugely more valued in your organization than if you don't connect your business, your data to business outcomes. And so it is a recipe, a systematic book with worksheets and all that kind of fun stuff in order to bridge that gap. That's the reason we wrote that book.
And to stay relevant in a
To
in
stay
an AI
ahead, yeah, to
phase.
stay
Yeah,
relevant,
stay,
yeah,
yeah,
because this is where
exactly.
AI is going. And if you don't believe me, it's where every single technology has ever gone, from a solution focus to an end user focus, but
Yeah.
not throwing away what's under the hood of the car, because that's super cool, right?
Mm.
But just complementing it and supercharging it by making sure that it's relevant to the use cases that people need to solve.
And only doing it on your vacation, like you do, Lorien, right?
Yeah, right.
So, how do you see decision intelligence and AI evolving over the next decade? What kind of challenges do you foresee? And for instance, aligning human values and ethics with machines, and some of the things that you have had a long career. You've been around the block here. So, what do you see will be the problems now in the future? There's a lot of ethic discussions going on. I'd like to know some of your deliberations on that.
Well, I've been through 3 AI hype cycles. So there was huge hype in AI in the mid '80s. It was just as big as it is now. The Japanese fifth generation project, the Alvey project in the UK, MCC in the US. You might not remember that there was AI on the front page of the New York Times in the '80s.
I was
You probably
born in
weren't alive.
'83. I had other
There you go.
focuses.
And then there was another one before that, and so we do, because AI is also a Hollywood genre. We have this really bizarre situation where it does get overhyped. I think the current AI will cool a little bit and we'll start to really systematically understand its limitations. And as it starts to cool, people will start to say, okay, let's get real. Let's really start asking the tougher questions. And this has been happening the last couple of years. Why do the Gartner people call their things decision
Mm.
intelligence? It's because the word AI is starting to cool in some business contexts. They're looking for a new branding in order to align themselves better with business outcomes. And so we're already seeing the early phases of that. And
Yeah,
so,
it's just
like
becoming
any,
everything, right? Yeah, it's becoming everything
yeah,
for
I
them.
mean, like any engineering discipline, it's going to grow up, and it will have a balance between, the
Mm.
technology, but also the use case and the human perspective and what it supports. And I think by the end of the century, DI will be as important as AI. And I'm okay if you don't call it DI. We don't have to call it that name, but something that starts with the use case and the need and the business outcome you're trying to achieve as front and center, as opposed to the data. I often like to say, right now it's like you show up at a restaurant and the waitress serves you a bowl of flour and a bowl of water and some chicken in a plate, and they don't assemble it into a usable form. And that's really, what old AI has been. Well,
Mm,
Gen AI starts to assemble it into a usable form, but not all the way, because it doesn't
mm.
really on its own connect you to your, higher profits or better competitive stance or all of the other business outcomes. And so that's where we're going to be in the next 20 or 30 years. And I wouldn't have been so sure of that maybe 8 years ago, but it's finally starting to happen. So it's an exciting moment and weird moment for me, actually, for
But I
that to
think
be
actually
happening.
one of your comment there is one of the most calming comments I've heard about the Gen AI revolution. It has to move to the user interface, has to, business problems, and it can't fix the whole world by itself because the whole market is so, oh, you're gonna lose your job, the world's gonna, collapse or something, fake everything, right? But
Yeah, because
you
that's the
were,
clickbait. That's a really good story
yeah,
to share with your friends. Hey, have you heard of this? And so it gets
yeah,
overhyped relative to its underlying truth. That
yeah.
story.
But Lorien, I actually wrote down a question in the beginning of the podcast that I didn't ask you, but now I'm gonna ask you because I think it's actually a good one, or maybe it's just anyway. So when you're asking people to not just make quick decisions or make decisions, in our politicians in Denmark, whenever there's a problem, they say, and everyone in the whole world can almost see, okay, we should probably do something like this, right? They always say, let's put down a commission or a group of smart people and let them work it out for 3 years, right? So we set down smart people in a room, think for 3 years, and then so can't you also, and then they don't follow their recommendations afterwards anyway. So can't you overthink these things as well? Are you not just asking us to do with decision intelligence, do even more of this figuring out, discussing before we make this? Are we not delaying decisions? Oh,
That's a really good question. And what decision intelligence, it would not be a viable discipline if it wasn't a whole chapter in that O'Reilly book as to how much is good enough. And
mm,
core to decision intelligence is, and we have this mistake in machine learning. Oh, train your model so it's 98%. Oh, 98 is not as good as 99%.
yeah,
Well, it turns out, and oh, the digital twin of the planet Earth needs to be high fidelity, as high fidelity as possible. No, there's a proper level of accuracy, there's a proper level of fidelity. And what's wonderful about when you draw that causal decision diagram with the actions and the outcomes, it's really easy to draw. Then you can do an analysis on it and you can say, how accurate does this piece of the diagram have to be for us to
mm,
make a good decision? And what we often learn is, there's certain actions, no matter what we do with that action, I'm hit my microphone. No matter what we do with the action, it has no impact on the outcome. And so any data
mm,
associated with that is irrelevant. But we won't know that unless we do the causal analysis to know how actions impact outcomes. And so a DI model actually has this huge ability to tell you what not to do, to tell you the data that you don't need externally, the actions you shouldn't consider, right? Because it is a structured mechanism
mm.
for working. I mean, one of the big returns on investment for DOI is it avoids unnecessary, what I call gratuitous data management, right? Because it focuses you on those actions that actually have a big impact on your outcomes, or those external factors. Maybe you thought that the weather mattered. The weather doesn't matter at all. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's the GDP of your country that matters. So it has this huge focusing ability and will actually get you to decisions faster.
So it's not something about your intuition saying this is irrelevant. It is actually something the model will tell me if this is irrelevant.
Exactly.
It's not just
Well,
the hippo, Dr. Lorien Pratt.
that's right. You and the model and all the people who collaborate on the model. If you go
Mm,
back to that blueprint analogy, who creates that blueprint and who reviews that blueprint? It's the electrician, it's the plumber, it's the end user who's going to occupy the building, it's
mm,
the architect. And so it is a single visual place where everybody's understanding can be combined into a single picture. So it's not so much the diagram that's smart, it's all the people who finally had a structured place to put their
yeah.
expertise, such that we could see how my expertise relates to your expertise, where my electrical wire relates to your plumbing. I'm using that as an analogy, but where my financials relate to your engineering choice, relate to the marketing's
Yeah.
sales decision, and to understand how those three previously separate silos interoperate in a common in a picture that shows how we all fit together.
Lorien, this has been a really, really great conversation. I've loved I've loved really so many bits of this. I thought was really, really brilliant, and so many nuggets of
Most
wisdom
of the
and
brilliance was
knowledge.
yours. Let's be clear,
No,
Lasse.
no, no. God, seriously, no. I wrote down so many places where there are nuggets, so I thought this is gold. I need to go back and listen to this again and again. But I have a final question for you, as that we always do on this podcast, and I hope you're ready for that one.
Yes.
So, Lorien, what is the only constant?
Partway through, I would say the last decade, when I had done all these interviews, I had spent about a year talking to people before decision intelligence was interviewed and was invented. And so we had this thing with the actions and the outcomes that I told you about a minute ago. Partway through last decade, I was actually training my dog, right? And my dog has this thing, and I have a dog trainer I hired to teach me how to train the dog. And she said, think about it as antecedent behavior consequence, ABC. The antecedent is the dog's in the kitchen, and I say, sit. The behavior is the dog sits. The consequent is he gets a cookie. He gets some kind of reward. And I go, that sounds a lot like actions and outcomes, which is what I heard in all these interviews. And so the constant, and this is operant conditioning. This is what dogs do. This is what amoebas do, right? Is it's not just humans, it's not just all humans, but many life forms can be thought of as operating within a context of some antecedent situation. They take some behavior, and then through some causal chain, there is some consequence.
Mm.
And this was sort of the universal archetype we discovered in a year of interviews in 2009. And I only later realized this was operant conditioning in my dog. And so, from a technologist's or data scientist point of view, the constant is your job, you might not have realized it because it's been doing imperfectly, is to support people taking actions within contexts that lead to outcomes. That's the constant. And if you ignore the actions available and the externals, the context and the outcomes, you're going to do an imperfect job. If you understand what those are, you can stay ahead of the curve. That's the constant.
That's a really great constant, Dr. Lorien Pratt. And thank you so much for being on The Only Constant. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Lasse. And thank you to your listeners for hanging out for so long. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Lasse, again, for being quite brilliant with your questions.
You've listened to The Only Constant, a podcast sponsored by Basico.